Mark Russell and Michael Allred enter the space age as a young farm boy from Smallville ventures out into a dangerous world on the verge of destruction to find out how he can use his amazing powers to help save it. Mark Russell yet again captures lightning in a bottle with his absolutely amazing first book in his Space Age series that, while is absolutely a Superman story and about his origins at its core, it is also equally a story about the birth of a new world in the larger DC multiverse. Mark spares no time getting into the world and its 60s era setting, connecting it up with Crisis on Infinite Earths and using that as a really big part of the drive of Clark Kent, who here is a young and somewhat sheltered boy who wishes he could do more for the world with his amazing powers. Russell perfectly captures the hesitant attitude of Ma and Pa Kent, who have, thanks to their own experiences out in the world, know it isn't the way Clark thinks it is, and it's a lot harsher than it is, but they do it in a way that they aren't telling him just to go and let people die and not use his powers to help or anything, but instead just be wary of the surroundings and wary of the world at large. On top of Clark's journey around the world and his training under Jor-El, we also see the origins of other famous DC characters like Batman and Lex Luthor, whose stories are tied together really well through their respective companies, and I love how unique Batman's origins are in this universe and how he became the crime fighter he is, as well as the level of crime fighter he is. He isn't someone who is just beating up bank robbers. He's actually taking on the power elite and taking down people like Lex Luthor who are trying to blow up the world, which I think is a really unique way to take Batman. Lois Lane's character journey is thoroughly explored as well, and she's utilized in a way I've really seldom seen, in that she's one of Clark's core inspirations. Now that's something that we've seen before in Superman, where he is very inspired by Lois and her writing and her as a reporter, but I like what Russell did here in that she is one of his core inspirations for helping the world thanks to her heroicism, teaching Clark that powers or strength don't make the hero, just being there to help does. Mark also ties her to some real life events like Lois covering George Wallace's insanely racist presidential campaign from the 60s, as well as meeting civil rights legend John Lewis, and even gives Lois an amazing piece of dialogue picking apart the whole truth, justice and the American way motto in a way I've never actually seen before, but when Mark sets it out the way he does through Lois's dialogue, it just clicks with me, and it's just amazing that I've never actually thought of it that way, and it was fantastic. Mark also manages to make everything feel so big and grand, and it makes sense given the timeline of the book and how in the 60s people were looking to the stars and space travel was about to take off and other technological advances were beginning to arrive, like computers and the television, color TV and all that sort of stuff. So I like that he was able to inject that sort of grand feel and, you know, reach for the stars, sky's the limit sort of stuff into these heroes and characters. Michael Allred joins Mark in telling this amazing story with his signature pop art 60s inspired artwork, which looks fantastic on all of these characters, especially his redesign of Batman, who is the only character who is actually redesigned, and it looks great, realistic and functional, setting itself apart from other 60s inspired versions of the character, which was a great move seeing that Allred actually drew the Adam West Batman for a very long time in the 60s Batman series, so I like that he was able to set that apart with this new iteration of Batman. Like how Mark made the story feel grand, Michael did the same with the artwork, making big chunks feel like I was watching a third or second act of a movie, with some great heroic shots of all the heroes, especially Superman when he finally gets the costume. Superman Space Age Issue 1 was an incredible beginning to Mark Russell and Michael Allred's take not just on Superman's origins, but the origins of an entire DC universe, setting itself apart from other period piece comics with colourful, fun art, snappy, relevant dialogue, and a refreshing yet familiar take on the Man of Steel. I'm going to give this issue a 10 out of 10. Superman Space Age Issue 1 heads to 1985, where Superman sees something happening to Earth as he remembers how Jor-El told him that it's better to live with purpose than die by accident, than live by accident and die without a purpose. As hellfire rains down on Earth, Superman heads to the Fortress of Solitude, where he says goodbye to the bottled city of Kandor and his creatures in his intergalactic zoo, as he deactivates all of the alarms and diverts all energy to the living quarters. Lois arrives, telling Clark that it's happening, but Clark knows, asking if he ever told his wife how much he loves her. Lois knows he does that every day as their young son Jonathan comes in, asking if everything is okay, but Clark knows it's not. The fortress begins to shake itself apart as the Kents sit together one final time. Decades before, in 1963, Pa Kent awakens Clark to tell him that he made the cover story of the paper. Clark knows that it's just the school paper, but Pa knows that he should still be proud, asking for his son's help around the farm. After a hard day's work, Clark tells his father he could have just done it in an instant before his pop got off the porch, but Jonathan asks if it would have been done quick or would have been done right though. Clark wonders why he has to waste his life on the farm since he knows he could save the world, but Pa asks if he could save it quick or save it right, since there have been plenty of men over the years who think that it's their destiny to save the world, and they always make the same mistake in thinking that it was theirs to save in the first place. And if the world needs Clark, it will let him know. Jonathan remembers how he tried to save the world once, remembering his deployment during World War II to Saipan. He remembers how he arrived on the bombed out Japanese island and how he had it all figured out and figured that it was only going to be a quick mission to round up POWs, but one of the prisoners had a bomb vest and killed half his unit. Pa never knew men were capable of such things, and while the Japanese were beaten, they had no thought of surrender. Jonathan is helped up by the remaining soldiers as they head for the island's caves where the Japanese are hiding out, killing the soldiers as they rush them. Jonathan soon sees the flick of a lighter inside the cave, causing him to shoot at it. He is soon shocked to find that he has killed a child who was figuring a way out of the cave by using the lighter as a light. He knows that they say that the face of everyone you've ever killed stays with you when you close your eyes to sleep, but it's much worse than that, since after a while you don't see them at all and the dead disappear when they need them, since that's the price of their own survival and the price they pay to make room for the living. Clark never knew any of this, as Pa says that he came home and a few months later Clark arrived, remembering how he and Martha saw the rocket fall from Earth, finding it in a field along with the baby Clark. He remembers how everything felt so broken after the war and he looked to the universe for a sign and it delivered Clark to them. He thinks they are all a sign from the universe and things can be different. He reveals to Clark that there is something he never told him, revealing the crystalline capsule that brought Clark to them was just part of a larger spacecraft, which after depositing Clark to the Kent took off into the night sky. He knows his son was the sign from heaven he needed after all of the bloodshed of war, and he still needs that sign. Clark asks how he is expected to stay on the farm and not reveal himself to the world, since part of him is out there, but Pa knows that part of them all is out there, and with any luck, they never find it. Pa heads inside and soon Clark goes to join him, only to find that his parents are glued to the TV as the news of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy hits the airwaves. Clark thinks about what his father told him and how he thinks he was trying to tell him trauma sears itself into them and that their innocence slips away no matter how hard they try and hold on to it. In Washington, billionaire Bruce Wayne meets with fellow billionaire Lex Luthor, who are both there at the Pentagon to bid on a defense contract. They both are soon met by General Sam Lane, who apologizes they have to cancel their meeting thanks to the president's assassination. Over the Arctic Ocean, the US Air Force and Hal Jordan form a defensive pattern, keeping an eye on the Soviet submarines there until Lyndon B. Johnson is sworn in as president. In Metropolis, Perry White demands his reporters get to work since they have less than 12 hours to get the story of the century out. Ron Troop wonders how they can even get there since all planes have been grounded, and Perry wonders if they have anyone on assignment in or near Texas. Learning Lois Lane is there, something he's not too happy about since she specializes in the kooks and cranks. With no other choice, he is forced to give her the JFK assassination story as Lois meanwhile interviews a crazy dog lady who thinks all her dogs are psychic. President Johnson is soon sworn in as the Kents continue to watch the news with great interest, learning that the assassination may lead to an attack by the Soviets. Clark knows that it's happening now and he needs the world to see him now. Clark leaves the farm, telling Pa that he'll figure out what to do on the way there. Clark takes off into the sky as Jonathan tells Martha that they can protect their son from the world no more and that they can not protect the world from him. In the Arctic Circle, Air Force pilot Hal Jordan radios into command and tells him that there is no movement from the Russian nuclear subs. Command tells him to look out for anything unusual as the Russians pick up something coming in fast but flying erratically as Clark arrives but is hit by a bird. The Russians think that it's some type of American weapon getting ready to launch their missiles. One thinks that this will be the destruction of everything, but the captain of the sub thinks this will be the revolution and they will be victorious. The Russian missiles are loaded as Clark swoops in to try and stop them, but Hal Jordan soon soon shoots him down, knocking Clark into the snow below as Hal tells his command that if he told them what he just saw, they would ground him. With Clark down, the Russians also stand down, maintaining their course in the water. At LexCorp, Luthor knows that they are very lucky to have evaded nuclear annihilation, wondering if his board have any ideas to salvage the military contracts. No one has any ideas, so Lex gets Miss Tessmacher to call one of the generals on the award committee, wanting to try and speak to the one who has the gambling debts. Perry White, meanwhile, is stressed out since no one has heard from Lois Lane, and it's 1 hour before print. Jimmy knows that she will come through, and soon, Perry is given the copy of Lois's story. Perry looks it over, finding it not bad, and he tells his people to run it as Lois meanwhile continues investigating the assassination, talking with Abraham Zapruder about the footage he captured on his home camera, as well as another witness, talking with a woman who had gotten some of JFK's blood on her coat, but she knows she didn't get it cleaned off, knowing that some stains you just carry with you. As Bruce Wayne is shown a black bulletproof car by Lucius Fox and Lex is shown some simulations on nuclear war, Clark awakens in the snow, spotting a beam of light nearby. He discovers the light is coming from the crystalline rocket that brought him to Earth, as Lois knows that history is a wildfire and it consumes the weak and strong alike until nothing is left to burn, and the living are but the burn ward of history, which they can only pick what they can from the ashes and move on. Metropolis meanwhile is swept up in Lois's article about the death of JFK as Clark reaches the crystals, which begin to transform around him and construct a giant crystalline fortress, calling Clark Kal-El of Krypton. Inside the fortress, he sees the ghostly form of a being named Jor-El, who claims to be his father and that he hails from the planet Krypton. Jor-El says that Kal-El was sent to Earth when Krypton exploded, and the craft that brought him to Earth was also there to create a fortress and home for Kal-El in a location so remote that only he could reach once he mastered his powers. Jor knows that the people of Earth might one day have something the people of Krypton didn't have, hope, and Kal-El was sent to Earth not just to be his salvation, but also the human's salvation, and the day will come when he is called to help the world, and when that day comes, he will need to be ready. Clark asks how he can do this, learning that he will need to harness all of his abilities, and by now he should have learned how to harness his heat vision and scientific intellect. Clark has no idea about any of these powers or abilities, as Jor had hoped. Clark has spent his years on Earth learning about their multiple cultures and traditions and ways of life, since as the guardian of Earth, it's his job to mostly listen, and having done all of this, he should be finally ready. Jor-El shows him a suit encased in the crystals, saying that it's made from the indestructible fabric of Krypton and emblazoned with the family seal so that Kal-El may not just be Earth's champion, but also the pride of Krypton as well. Clark knows that he isn't even close to being ready, leaving the fortress and heading home, knowing that both his fathers weren't so different after all, since both had seen enough of destruction and had hoped to watch something grow, so he doesn't want to let them down. He returns to Smallville, apologizing to Pa Kent since he was right. In 1964, Clark gets ready to leave Smallville, giving a new hat by his father, who thinks that it might help him fit in the big city, while his mother gives him some sandwiches and a journal, since it might be nice if he had someone to talk to, even if it's just himself. Clark thanks his parents and boards the train for Metropolis, and later at the Daily Planet, Clark and the other reporters welcome Lois Lane back to the bullpen. Perry knows that she is now a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter thanks to her story on JFK, and she really is lightning in a bottle. Lois just wants to get back to work, but Perry introduces Clark to her as the new cub reporter who'll be taking over the Coops and Cranks cases from her. Lois hopes that he can keep a straight face with the cases, as Clark soon gets a grip on who he will be interviewing, but Perry thinks that while his writing is subpar, he is the fastest typer he has ever seen. Clark one day goes to meet with a man at the Seagull, a local bar, finding the man is named Pryor. Clark knows his notes say that Pryor is from the future, but Pryor says that he's not from the future, he just knows about the future. Clark humors him, asking him what happens in the future, so Pryor tells him that it all ends in about 20 years, but of course the world could come to an end before that thanks to quantum fluctuations, which could make a good choice turn into a bad choice, and so on. He knows the hard end, however, is when the rest of the universe goes up in flames, and it's all his fault. Pryor reveals that he was the one trying to make antimatter fuel on his Earth, to transform it, and he tested it on himself to show the scientist how safe it was, and he succeeded, which is how he was able to unleash the Anti-Monitor, who told Pryor of the infinite Earths that dwelled in the multiverse, which he wanted to destroy and bring order to, so only one universe of pure antimatter existed. Clark hopes that the being will consider leaving this universe alone, but Pryor knows that he won't, revealing that he was given the power to see and travel through time to watch his own world be ripped into dust, but then also to see every version of that happen as well. He knows no one, not even Clark Kent, can stop this, and as punishment for unleashing this on the multiverse, he makes himself watch the death of trillions. Clark thinks that this was the craziest thing he had ever heard, and it chilled him to the bone, but Lois warned him not to get the kooks inside his head. He thinks the idea that the world could survive another 20 years somehow seems wildly optimistic at this point, as at the Pentagon, Bruce Wayne delivers his military contract bid to Sam Lane and the other generals, telling them that they will need to fight the Soviets with conventional warfare eventually, which is why he has developed a battle armor, which he shows video slides of defeating an entire squad of Russians. He also showcases the suit's utility belt and the various armored vehicles he has designed for it as well. The generals think that this is just some fancy movie Bruce made to sell his suits, but Bruce reveals it was all real, and he was the one who was actually testing the costume himself. LexCorp is next, and Luthor takes the stage and tells them that Bruce might be right and they will be fighting the Russians the conventional way for a while, but the human race has never created a weapon it hasn't used, and while the nuclear arsenal of the world is growing exponentially, nuclear war is inevitable, and it would be better to have it now than sometime later, since they might still survive it. He shows the generals a bunker system he is developing to save the American democracy for future generations. The generals ask if anyone else would like to weigh in, so General Knox brings in Hal Jordan to talk about what he saw during the engagement in the Russians. Hal says he wasn't sure what it was, but it went into Russian airspace, and it would have been seen as an aggression against the Russians, and they would have fired back. The generals ask if this could happen again, and Hal knows that it will, but war is inevitable, and the question is who gets the first shot fired. Sam dismisses everyone, and Bruce and Lex wish each other good luck on their bids, as later on, Clark and Lois head to the Seagull for a drink, with Clark ordering a milk. They talk about Clark's kooks and crank speed, with Clark telling Lois about Pryor and how, while he all sounded crazy, what he said with such authority, and he made the world ending sound so inevitable, and it's why Clark keeps coming back to the bar and hopes to run into him again. Lois talks about her father and how he served during World War II in Europe, and how his squad was told to hold a bridge at any costs against the Germans, who launched a huge counterattack against it. Lane and his men held out for days until both sides withdrew. Sam soon learned that the real battle, however, took place 40 miles south of them, so they fought for nothing. He talked to a captured German officer, asking him why he sacrificed so many men for the bridge he knew wasn't part of the German offensive, but the officer says that he was told to guard a bridge against an American offensive. Lois says that while some things are written in the stars, in most cases it's just believing that something is inevitable that makes it so. Clark knows that Pryor did say other crazy things like the US being conquered by insects, making Lois laugh and tell Clark not to worry about it. At the Pentagon, the generals mull over who to choose for the contract, with many citing Wayne's bid as interesting, and it allows them to engage the Russians away from their own soil. But the rest of them like Luthor's idea, since it acknowledges the reality of the situation of nuclear weapons. General Knox vies for Luthor's plans, and Lex soon wins the decision, telling General Knox that he did well in supporting him and his gambling debts are now paid off, telling him he should take the day off and to head for the track. Bruce meanwhile figures Lex won the bid, thinking that they have to destroy everything now, but Lucius Fox thinks that they should keep it and just move it off the books, since while he doesn't trust the people writing history, off the books is a pretty good place to be right now. In Metropolis, Clark sees Lois to the train station, telling her that he never did find Pryor again. Lois tells him to just remember the 2 rules of writing. The story isn't always what he thought it would be, and when he's stuck on something, there is always something else that he could be working on. Clark takes this to heart, heading to the Fortress of Solitude to begin his training with Jor-El, learning how to control his flight and studying Kryptonian science, as he knows whatever strength fate granted him is nothing compared to the strength he's gotten from the people in his life. As he continues to train, he learns about more amazing powers like his X-ray vision. Soon he asks the AI father about the many problems confronting the world, with so many different options on what he needs to do to save it. So how does he know who is right and what to do to save the world from when the world itself is such a mess? Jaw says that no one saves the world, and you can only hope to help people survive it. Lois meanwhile arrives in Mississippi, covering George Wallace's run for president and the race-fueled riots and attacks that followed thanks to the governor vying for segregation, among other things. Lois knows that the truth about knowing what being an American is that some judge truth and justice by how well they support the American way, while others judge the American way by how much it stands up for truth and justice. For some, freedom is simply the name they give their way of life, but others is what they call the struggle to survive. Lois, of course, is thrown in prison after covering these incidents, thrown in a cell with John Lewis and his friends, where she interviews the civil rights legend, asking him if Americans are too addicted to the pleasure of pop culture to care about the struggle, but John hasn't seen the two things as mutually exclusive. He remembers how years ago he participated in some lunch counter sit-ins, going in understanding that segregated lunch counters weren't going to serve them, so beforehand he and his friends went to a Chinese restaurant for a big meal, finding it to be a wonderful experience, but also necessary, since when the sit-in went the way it expected, they were beaten and arrested and locked up overnight. He remembers thinking about that meal he had and how he planned to go back to that restaurant, so he tells Lois that simple pleasures and things they love aren't distractions from life, but sources of strength that keep them alive. Clark meanwhile arrives to bail Lois out of prison, but the cops say that she isn't there. Clark can see that she clearly is thanks to his X-ray vision, but the cops begin getting angry with him, asking him to leave, so he does. Later on that night, the cops get ready to head home as they feel an earthquake rumbling the building, checking the prisoners, but find that the entire wall of the jail behind the bars has been smashed in. Lois and Clark both make front-page stories out of the incidents, as later, in 1965, Lex begins his test on his new nuclear shelters, telling the watching generals a 10-megaton bomb will be dropped on the island the bunker he is on, and he's willing to bet his own life that the shelter will withstand it. Luthor begins his test, but it's revealed the bomb is actually in Coast City, where the generals are. He activates the bomb, and the entire city is wiped off the map as Lex, who was never on the island but still in his LexCorp building, meets with the rest of the board members who realize what just happened. Lex knows that his entire company is about to take off properly, and the government will think the blast was the first strike from the Soviets, sending them into all-out war. Lex says that it will escalate, but they will be safe down in their bunkers, biding their time until they can safely emerge. Dr. Silas Stone refuses to be part of the destruction of humanity, but Lex knows that they are saving it, giving the Doctor a check for $1 million as his severance, understanding not everyone is on board with his plans, and he tells Silas to spend the money while he can, and for the others to try some of the fruit he has on the table, since it might be a while before they can see any more. At the Daily Planet, Perry tells Lois to cover the destruction of Coast City, and Clark tells her to be careful as she leaves. Clark thinks about how out of all the people in his life, no one has taught him about heroism more than Lois Lane, and that being a hero isn't about doing something spectacular or being strong or smart or having powers, but simply the act of being there where you are needed the most. Hal Jordan meanwhile surveys the destroyed Coast City with his squad, telling them that he's going to peel off towards the border to search for any Soviet bombers. Bruce learns the two nukes are missing, learning that they were with LexCorp, as Alfred thinks they should move to the bomb shelter, so they do, with Alfred asking if he should make some sandwiches for Bruce, but Bruce begins suiting up in his combat suit, telling Alfred that he'll get some food on the road. Clark meanwhile heads to the fortress, knowing that he's learned a lot about the planet in the last few years and from people he respects, and they have taught him that the world doesn't wait for you to be ready, and his mistake was never wanting to save the world before he was ready, and it was in thinking that he could do it alone. He grabs his Kryptonian costume and takes off into the sky, knowing that the people who do the most good aren't the ones who are the strongest or the smartest, but the ones who simply show up. Hal Jordan meanwhile intercepts a strange-looking aircraft, shooting it down over the desert, watching it crash land below. Hal lands and approaches the ship, where he finds a strange pink alien. The dying alien says his name is Abin Sur of the Green Lantern Corps, and they are on the side of life, but they are losing. Abin says that the Green Lanterns monitor all worlds, especially those on the verge of destroying themselves, and he was sent to Earth to assess them. Hal tries to get him help, but Abin gives Hal his ring, telling him that there is no time to find a replacement, so Hal must take it and use its power. Hal knows that he's not worthy, and Abin knows that, but he was there. The alien soon dies from his wounds as at the White House, LBJ tells Leonard Brezhnev that the time for talking is over, having sent his missiles 5 minutes ago. Clark meanwhile manages to intercept the missiles, destroying them all, which angers Lex as he learns from Otis that none of the missiles from America landed in Russia. Lex thinks that he needs to persuade them with another attack, this time wanting to use the last bomb he has to blow up Metropolis. Otis tells him that from the bomb shelter 100 feet under concrete, they can't activate the bomb, so Lex orders a management trainee to go to the surface and to do it as a jet black car smashes into the building, hitting some of Lex's men. The men open fire on the bulletproof car as the door of the car is launched off right into them and black plumes of smoke come out of it, allowing the Batman to get the drop on the men, taking them down. Lex gives the detonator to one of the trainees, telling him to go to the surface and hit the button, and he'll be rewarded greatly. The Batman soon appears, grabbing Luthor and taking him down, as later, Lois visits the cratered coast city, knowing that her father was there when the bomb went off. Lex is soon revealed to be the one responsible for the murder of 2 million people in the city, as LBJ and Brezhnev meet to settle their problems, deciding that both countries will undergo complete nuclear disarmament. Lois knows that no one actually figured out what happened to the American missiles or why they never reached their targets in Russia, as Clark buries the missiles on the moon, while Lois remembers people calling this the space age and at other times the nuclear age, as if they couldn't make up their minds on what to call it, but today they made their choice, since in order to survive destruction, they turned to hope and they chose to stop digging their own grave long enough to look up to the stars. Clark soon returns to the farm, asking Pa if he needs some help with the hay, but Pa thinks it's doing just fine on its own, guessing his son had something to do with why the fact they're all not nuclear waste now. Clark knows that he needs to believe that this meant something and it's not all hopeless, but tomorrow could start it all over again and something else will destroy the planet, and sometimes it feels like they are trying to outrun their own shadow. Clark thinks that it's stupid to imagine that he could just put on a cape and fly around and keep the shadow at bay, but Pa agrees, but then also maybe hope is what they call the stupidity they need. Mark Kent, however, isn't worried about anything that brings them all together, as 1 month later, Princess Diana of Themyscira arrives at the UN, telling them that her people thought they could hide themselves away from danger and it would never come for them, but that's not true, and like it or not, they are part of the world. Lois reports on how, thanks to Bruce Wayne funding them, a Hall of Justice was built as a meeting place for those who wanted to fight for the planet's survival. Superman meets with Batman, learning he's called that thanks to the ears. Clark soon introduces Wonder Woman to the Green Lantern, and Lois knows that what the heroes call themselves doesn't matter. The important thing is that they are there, as Hal asks what they do now, so Superman says that that's what they are there to figure out.